In order to secure silvicultural exemption, states had to come up with a number of best management practices for timber harvest in and around water bodies. And the state of Maine was one of the first states to comply with this when vernal pools became a topic of interest. Approximately 15 years ago, about 1995, we decided at that time to form a group of stakeholders and come up with a series of recommendations on how to deal with the pools. We didn't term these as best management practices. We call these habitat management guidelines. We're not interested in having these sites mapped. We would prefer that they were not considered as significant habitat on a map right now. We would prefer to not see them regulated.
We do a lot of crop tree management. We release the best trees, and that won't vary a great deal beyond. We leave it denser around the vernal pools, but we do try to make openings and get some different age classes coming into the vernal pools. We don't treat a vernal pool as something we don't go near. We do work it, but we do modify what we do.
When you drop a tree, you want to limit out right there. That way you're creating just a very minimum disturbance to the ground. Whereas you've dragged the whole tree out, which a lot of them do, drag the whole tree out, then you're disturbing a lot of soil.
We ask that within that first 100 feet that you not disturb the soil. With modern logging equipment, that's often very easy to achieve. You can drive in with boomed equipment and reach in and grab material and pull it out without having to drag it across the ground very much, and you don't have to bring wheeled equipment in to the site. This machine will muckle onto a tree, cut it off with a big saw that it has, a big rotary saw. It'll cut the stem off, and then it'll direct the stem down. A good operator can put that stem down pretty close to where he wants it most of the time.
We can discuss or debate just how much the state of Maine or how much Massachusetts or how much nationally, we stand to lose in terms of private forest land, but I think we'd all have to agree that they're not making any more, and population is increasing, and we've got a nasty habit of consuming land for residential and other forms of development. So forests are important for greater social benefits, and they're at risk to some extent in terms of land use change.
Its value, even if a landowner has no interest in developing their property, and all they really want to do is manage the forest products, and that's the vast majority of the people we deal with. Anytime, and whether it's the vernal pool or anything else, if it has an impact on the overall value of the property, then the landowner could be a little anxious.
I received a very official looking letter from DEP that said I did have a significant vernal pool and it was subject to the Natural Resource Protection Act. And it took some digging in the rules and regulations to find where this exemption for forest management activities existed. I will say that I contacted my local DEP office, and they were right up front in saying that forest management activities did not require a permit, and if that was all I wanted to do on the property, then I was all set.
Right now, under the National Natural Resources Protection Act, forestry activities around the vernal pool do not require a permit. And as far as we are told, nobody is looking to change that. But the fact that it could possibly change someday can add to, as Tom was saying, the cumulative effect of, will I be able to do what I want with my property?
With the guidelines the way they are now, you do have to leave some dead wood. You have to leave some debris on the ground, some actually dead trees on the ground. And some trees that are gonna die, you want to leave there for future dead wood. It is a little bit more time consuming, and you are gonna lose a little bit of income from it, but it's what nature dictates you should be doing, and it's good for the environment.
I'm one of the landowners that's not unhappy that I have a vernal pool. They are unique little pieces of habitat, and protect some endangered and threatened species. They're necessary for them. The location of my vernal pool and the size of the property makes it, to me, almost an addition to what I'd like to have and do on the property. Someone who might be interested in retaining the development value down the road would be the person that would be affected by the further regulation of vernal pools.
These guidelines are not regulations. They are not laws. They are guidelines.
I think it would be prudent to assume that someday there may be a formal rulemaking process that might put the forestry guidelines into rules. But we're hopefully a long way away from that.
You don't have to get permits, but you do have to adhere to more or less standards, which usually it's good logging practice.
I mean, most of it seems to be common sense approach. I don't see it as overburdensome. You know, what we've talked about in the past. They like to have some shade and some occasional openings and don't drive through it. I mean, we don't want to drive through them anyway, and you know, not cutting every tree, you know, seems rational.
The thought that the vernal pools and some of these other significant wildlife habitats have forestry exemptions recognizes the fact that having that forest around is really the best outcome.
Nobody's going to build anything in there anyway, other than on the edge of a suburb where they fill it in. But really, the only enemy a vernal pool has is you know, large-scale development.
Once you fill it in, it's gone. It's gone forever. A vernal pool is gone forever when you fill it in.
As badly as you might treat the site, it will still come back. You haven't paved it over, you haven't filled it in. It's better that you treat it well. You know, then whatever recovery it's going to need is going to happen much faster.
I grew up in what used to be a common culture in America. You had the people who were attached to land. Farmers, everybody had a little farm and they all understood the process. But today the culture is so far removed that they need to be re-educated.
Regardless of whether somebody's a master logger, as a logger, they often come to workshops that might be sponsored by small woodlot owners or Maine Forest Service or other groups, the university, where they learn to recognize things like vernal pools and become familiar with the voluntary guidelines. So I'd say the vast majority of loggers in this state are working with what we call BMPs for water quality, vernal pools, and a number of things.
So the guidelines, this is kind of the crux of this. Basically, there's 3 zones that you need to be concerned with during the operation. The depression itself, the protection zone from 0 to 100 feet around that depression, and the amphibian life zone from 100 to 400 feet around the depression. And there's actually some reasons why these are called this. This is not a buffer, it's a protection zone. And there's a reason for that. A lot of you are now under green certification, which says that if these are best management practices or have that best management practice language in them, that you absolutely have to adhere to it. Well, the language in here was structured so that these are not best management practices, they're habitat management guidelines.
One of the hard things for a land manager or a landowner is what makes these vernal pools. Vernal means spring, and these pools fill up with water with snow melt and the spring rains, but then they dry off. And so later on, they're not, you know, really easily identified. And the key is then, when the pools are active and the animals are out there calling because they're croaking and calling each other, if we can identify the pools and get them onto our maps, flag them out with ribbons, put them on a GPS system, knowing where they are, because when you come back on snowshoes in the wintertime, or the skidder comes in and and there's 3 feet of snow, where's the vernal pool?
There are 2 handouts. The first one's already gone.
Foresters, I think, are increasingly aware of not just vernal pools, but a whole host of different elements that people would consider important for biodiversity. And we just had a workshop here last week where we had over 50 foresters from around the state who came to learn more about both vernal pool ecology and also different silvicultural and management harvesting operations that might be appropriate around pools.
Foresters think, oh, pool, amphibians, right? Those go together. And we don't think too much about, well, okay, so after the eggs hatch, after the little tadpoles, we all know about that. But where do they go?
Well, they're burrowing animals. They live underground most of the year. Not the wood frogs, but the salamanders do. And salamanders don't have claws on their front appendages, and so they can't actually dig. So what they do is they find the burrow of some other organisms, like a shrew or something, and they follow those burrows through. So if the area gets compacted, they're not really capable of digging new burrows for themselves. So what they have to do then is they have to come up on the surface of the soil. Spotted salamanders and blue spotted salamanders aren't particularly fast-moving organisms. They become easy prey when they come to the surface. Again, they need to be wetted most of the time. If they have to come out onto dry surfaces for a very long period of time, it's detrimental to them because their skin has to remain wet.
Amphibians have moist skins, and they need to stay moist. And so having the ground shaded is the key, so that they can move through without drying out. And the drying out can happen really fast.
So avoid excessive compaction.
This is a natural regeneration system. Nobody's planting these trees. The trees, give rise to the next generation of trees. But by making the gaps as a sequence over time, we can encourage the regeneration to occur over time and thereby get multiple age classes. And if we arrange that spatially in the right way, then the amphibians have a place always that they can move from the pool to the upland and back again. These blue polygons are the gap openings we created this past winter. You can see they are different shapes and sizes, and that's intentional. We're trying to get a creative variety of conditions on the land. This lower map shows the same map with the polygons we put in this year, the initial gaps, but also the ones we're going to create 20 years from now. And so this map shows the full series of 5 entries spaced at 20-year intervals, spanning in total 100 years.
That associated upland area around the pool is extremely important for the life cycle of the organisms using the pool. So you need to, in the planning phase, take that into account.
So that providing the right conditions in the upland and not disturbing the entire upland are key parts of the whole plan. We have Robin Avery, our operations manager, Francis Avery, the forest technician, work as a logging team. Francis does the felling, Robin does the yarding. And the key there is when Francis fells the trees to fall them in exactly the right directions so that Robin can then minimize the damage to the site as he pulls those trees off the site with a skidder. And so by pulling the cable further, the machine is covering less of the ground itself, so the tires aren't going all over the place. And when people visit those gaps, it's hard to picture how that was done, but they purposely would sort of fan the trees out and pull the cable as far as was practical to minimize the impact on site. The idea we worked with is to maintain the corridors of mature habitat like spokes on a wheel, radiating out from that vernal pool into the surrounding upland. The key is to maintain some element of mature forest for the amphibians to move through, now and throughout the next century.
We tend to garden that we may never harvest. Our gardens grow for 100 years as opposed to a farmer's corn rows, which are going to get harvested at the end of the season.
Once you become familiar with the complex biology and behavior of some of these vernal pool organisms, you can't help but become fascinated with them. And with that fascination comes care and a need to conserve and a desire to conserve those features. This is really hits home when you think about the fact that these vernal pools and a lot of the organisms in them have been adapted and evolving in these ecosystems for thousands of years, long before humans were even part of the northeastern post-glacial landscape. And so it really seems incumbent upon us as responsible stewards of the landscape just to give them the inherent right to exist and to provide them the opportunity to exist for thousands of years longer.